I want to turn to Venezuela now, another area of international crisis. The crisis there escalating over the weekend as members of the opposition clashed with soldiers and government loyalists at the country's border with Brazil. President Nicolas Maduro's military using deadly force to block humanitarian aid from entering the country. Joining us now, Yahoo Finance's Kristin Myers from our newsroom with the latest. Kristin.
Hi, Julie. So that's right. Violence continuing to escalate in the Venezuelan crisis. A few hundred protesters were injured. Some were actually killed as they tried to bring that humanitarian aid into Venezuela from across the border in Colombia and Brazil. Now, opposition leader Juan Guaido actually defied a travel ban and snuck into Colombia. He's actually going to be meeting with Vice President Mike Pence today in Bogota. And as a result, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro decided to sever diplomatic ties with Colombia as a result. Now, it'll be a little interesting to see what happens out of this meeting because there is a possibility that opposition leaders are going to ask the United States to intervene militarily in Venezuela. So far, though, the United States strategy has been to call on the Venezuelan military to overthrow Nicolas Maduro in a coup. However, President Trump has left that military intervention as an option on the table. And those calls for the Venezuelan military to overthrow Maduro was repeated again by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo last week when he was speaking to CNN. And he said that he was confident that Maduro's days were numbered.
Kristin, I know that Maduro was rallying his supporters in Venezuela. Does the fact that they weren't able to get these emergency supplies really into the country, is that a victory for Maduro? And do they see it that way among his supporters?
Well, it does. So there's two sides to that, right? So on the one hand, it doesn't look great for him inside the country where he's deeply unpopular for him to burn this humanitarian aid. However, it does embolden his stance among his supporters that he is standing up against these big interventionary tactics by the United States and others.
All right. Thank you very much, Kristin. Andy, what can the United States do short of military intervention to ramp up the pressure on Maduro to go?
Yeah, I mean, this whole military option thing, I just want to focus on that because Marco Rubio was tweeting out pictures of Manuel Noriega, sort of implying that, hey, we're going to do a Panama on you. Remember, we invaded Panama in 1989, 1990, December, January, 89th and 90. But, you know, it's a very different situation. By the way, a couple dozen U.S. soldiers died, a lot more casualties on the Panamanian side. Panama has about 4 million people and 29,000 square miles. Venezuela is about 10x that in terms of population and in terms of square miles. A very, very different situation. So to me, that option's really not on the table. So you're back to economic things, and I think it's working with South American allies. Joining us right now is Bulltick Chief Global Market Strategist and Head of Research and Strategy, Kathryn Rooney. Vera, thank you for joining us. You know, what you're watching develop in Venezuela, do you see the U.S. taking further action? Could there be military action?
Yeah, I'll take the other side of the last comment. I think it's certainly on the table, and I don't think it would be unilateral. So the only way that that works is one of Guaido has requested it. And by the way, this is not a coup that the U.S. is looking for and asking the military to do, because Nicolas Maduro is not the legitimate president. The legitimate interim president is Guaido. So it's not a military coup. It's recognizing the constitutionally authorized interim president, which is Guaido. So yes, there is military intervention. It's quite real, and it's very much on the table. But as I say, it would not be unilateral. We have the Lima summit, the group of Lima countries meeting today. And I think the U.S., if it were to do something militarily, and I hope it doesn't come to that, but I suspect it might, would do so with Colombian troops, Brazilian troops, among others. Specifically within this group, I think are the guys that we should look to intervene. Look, Nicolas Maduro, he hasn't left yet. And one asks oneself the question, why hasn't he? Apparently there's a plane that right outside his front door, he can take at any point. Why hasn't he done it? Well, I was able to ask Marco Rubio that question at a recent event, and I asked him, is it the drug trafficking? Because Maduro is intricately linked with what Rubio told me was 20% of cocaine that's on the streets in the U.S. is funneled through Venezuela. So is it the drug trafficking, or is it the fact that no other country will take him, which is what the senator told me? So look, the guy isn't going to go.
Okay.
So I think the military intervention multilaterally is a real threat.
So does he also still have enough support from the military that he's got enough backing there? That's another contributing factor to him staying?
Well, Julie, it's great that you raised this question because there's been so many defections. Just over the past weekend, you had 60 Venezuelan military soldiers defect to Colombia. One was shot because they found out, shot and killed by the Venezuelan army because they found out he had intended to. So there's the fear factor. That's why a lot of these day-to-day troops are still there working under Maduro. But I'll tell you what, Julie, I think that when money runs out, because remember, these generals are there because of both the drug trafficking, the oil money, it's running out. The U.S. is the main importer, so they don't have their pockets lined.
But don't they have the backing of the Chinese? I mean, let's talk about the numbers, and humanitarian issues clearly are more important, but the Chinese have billions of dollars in debt that the Maduro government, the Venezuelans, owe them. So don't the Chinese have a vested interest in supporting Maduro and to keep him in power?
The Chinese have a vested interest in China. They have a vested interest in getting their cash back. So that's what they're focused on. They have the oil for debt swap. So as Venezuela is no longer providing the oil production has dropped 75% over the past 15 years. It's now at 1 million barrels per day out from 3.5 million about 15 years ago. So China's just looking to get its cash back. If that means under the interim president, they're fine with that. And I'll be honest with you, Maduro's out. Sooner or later, he's gone. And I would say it's sooner rather than later. So I would contend that it's in the best interest of China to work with the interim government, to whom many, a widening number of countries have already acknowledged is the legitimate president and inevitably will become recognized as such. So I think China's looking for that, and Russia as well.
Kathryn, let me ask you, you mentioned coordinated military action with our Latin American allies. To what extent is that in the works or possible?
Yeah, like I said, I think it is in the works. I think it's on the table, and I think it is possible. Actually, today, President and Vice President Mike Pence said that he would be talking about concrete actions. I don't think he's going to announce military intervention, but I do think that it is quite possible. I know it's on the table. And as I mentioned, it seems difficult to imagine Maduro voluntarily stepping aside. I mean, look, it's culminated to this really complicated point, and he still hasn't left. He has no support amongst the Venezuelan people, none. And he's crumbling with the military as well. So he's really hanging on there. I do think it's a real possibility, especially if, as we saw over the weekend, and this continues to be the case, that the Maduro regime fires into Colombian territory, or God forbid, attacks the U.S. embassy, or does anything to escalate this situation. Maduro has been careful not to do so, but he's on the cusp of it.
Kathryn, Rooney, Vera, Bulltick, Chief Global Market Strategist and Head of Research and Strategy, thank you for joining us here on The Move.
Thanks, Adam.